1948, the Supe Valley, Peru. From the cockpit of his small plane, American professor Paul Kosok stared down at an impossible sight. 6 colossal pyramids rising from the bone-dry desert, a city as grand as any in Egypt. But when he found no pottery, the single required marker of civilization, the academic world dismissed his discovery. For 50 years, the find was ignored. This is the story of how European archaeologists called Caral a myth, until Americans uncovered the oldest city in the Americas, proving a lone visionary right and rewriting the history of 2 continents. For most of the 20th century, the experts, primarily based in the hallowed halls of British and European universities, had painted a very clear picture of human history. Civilization, they declared, had a single, definitive starting point: the Old World. It was a story that began and ended in the lands surrounding the Mediterranean and the Near East. Mesopotamia, with its sprawling cities between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, was the undisputed beginning. Egypt, with its god-kings and colossal pyramids, was its awe-inspiring twin. Everything else, everywhere else, was just an echo, a later attempt to catch up. This wasn't just an academic theory. It was dogma, an intellectual fortress built on the foundations of colonial-era thinking. The great archaeological discoveries of the 19th and early 20th centuries had all occurred in the Old World. The unearthing of Troy, the treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb, the deciphering of cuneiform tablets. These events captured the global imagination and, more importantly, the funding for research. It created a powerful feedback loop. The most spectacular finds came from the Near East, so that's where everyone looked, reinforcing the idea that it was the only place that truly mattered. This led to the rise of a powerful and pervasive theory known as hyperdiffusionism. Its most extreme proponents, like the British anatomist Grafton Elliott Smith, argued that nearly every sign of civilization across the globe, from pyramid building to mummification, originated in Egypt and was crudely copied by less advanced cultures. In this view, humanity didn't invent civilization multiple times. It was a singular miracle, a gift from the Nile Valley that spread across the world. This worldview had profound implications for how the Americas were perceived. To the academic establishment in London, Paris, and Berlin, the New World was a secondary theater of human history, a land of cultural infants. Influential figures, like the British archaeologist Graham Clark, championed this view. They constructed a rigid, linear timeline of human progress, and the Americas were placed firmly at the back of the line. While pharaohs were raising monuments that touched the sky around 2500 BCE, the peoples of the Americas were, according to the official story, still living in scattered primitive tribes. The idea that a complex, urban society could have emerged independently in the New World at the same time was considered not just unlikely, but a sign of amateur foolishness. The skepticism in the academic world was palpable. Esteemed anthropologists, like Alfred Kroeber, in his widely read 1948 textbook, Anthropology, presented a vision of the pre-Columbian world that, while detailed, reinforced this sense of a developmental lag. The great civilizations of the Americas, the Olmec, the Maya, the Inca, were magnificent, yes, but they were pegged as starting around 1500 BCE at the earliest. This placed them a full 2,000 years behind their Old World counterparts. It was a neat, orderly timeline that put Europe and the Near East squarely at the center of human achievement. This worldview was so powerful that it created a massive blind spot. Archaeologists knew what they were looking for, and a 5,000-year-old city in Peru wasn't it. They were searching for pottery, for gold, for the familiar markers of civilizations they already understood. Anything that didn't fit the pattern was dismissed as an anomaly, or worse, not seen at all. So, when evidence began to surface from the desolate coastal deserts of Peru, it was met not with excitement, but with dismissive shrugs. The place was a barren wasteland, 120 miles north of Lima, a region of sand and rock scorched by a relentless sun. What could possibly be there? The answer, as it turned out, was everything. But to find it, someone had to be willing to look past the dogma, to fly over the intellectual walls built by decades of Eurocentric thinking. The story needed an outsider, someone not bound by the established rules of the game, who saw the world not through the lens of accepted theory, but with their own two eyes. That person would not be a mainstream European archaeologist. Instead, it would be an American professor of economics with a passion for the past, who, from the cockpit of a rickety airplane, would spot something impossible on the desert floor below. What he saw that day would represent the first crack in the great wall of academic dogma. The impossible was about to become undeniable, but not before being ignored for 50 years. The story of Caral's rediscovery begins not with a trowel, but with the roar of a single-engine plane. The year was 1948, and the man in the cockpit was Paul Kosok, a professor from Long Island University. Kosok was the definition of a maverick. He wasn't a formally trained archaeologist beholden to the rigid doctrines of the time. He was an economic historian, a geographer, and a brilliant interdisciplinary thinker. His great obsession was the link between water and civilization. He believed that the story of humanity's rise could be told by following the ghost trails of ancient irrigation systems. To prove his theory, he came to Peru, a land of coastal deserts cross-cut by river valleys, a perfect natural laboratory. He spent months flying his small plane in harrowing sweeps over the arid plains, tracing the faint, grid-like patterns of ancient canals invisible from the ground. It was during one of these flights, over the bone-dry expanse of the Supe Valley, that he saw something that made him grab the controls. They were not canals. They were colossal. Below him, at least 6 enormous mounds rose from the desert floor, their pale forms stark against the brown earth. They weren't random hills. They were arranged in a vast, semicircular pattern, clearly the work of human hands. Spread across hundreds of acres were the unmistakable outlines of sunken plazas, terraced platforms, and what looked like sprawling residential complexes. Kosok knew instantly this was no mere village. It was a city, an ancient metropolis of breathtaking scale. He landed his plane on a nearby flat patch of desert, his heart pounding with the thrill of discovery. He walked through the silent, windswept ruins, a solitary figure in a lost world. The scale of the place was overwhelming. The largest pyramid was a staggering 500 feet long and 350 feet wide, nearly the size of 5 football fields at its base, and soared nearly 100 feet into the sky. He immediately dubbed the region America's Cradle of Civilization, a bold and provocative claim that flew in the face of the entire academic establishment. But as he explored the monumental ruins, a deeply troubling puzzle emerged. Kosok scoured the ground for the one thing he expected to find everywhere: pottery. For archaeologists of the era, ceramics were the absolute non-negotiable calling card of any settled, complex society. Pottery was essential for storing grain and water, for cooking, and for ritual. More importantly, the changing styles of pottery shards were the primary method archaeologists used to date a site and place it in the grand timeline of history. A civilization without pottery was, by definition, not a civilization at all. It was a paradox, a contradiction in terms. How could a society organize the immense labor needed to build pyramids but not know how to fire a simple clay pot? Kosok's findings, published in preliminary reports and presented to geographical societies, were met with a resounding silence from the European archaeological community. His status as an amateur in the field worked against him. But the real issue was the data itself. The lack of ceramics was the nail in the coffin. To the experts, Kosok was an overenthusiastic economist who had mistaken a series of unusual, naturally formed hills for a lost city. His grand pronouncements were seen as the product of wishful thinking. After all, how could a pre-ceramic culture possibly organize the labor required to build such massive structures? It simply did not compute. The site was documented, noted, and then promptly filed away, dismissed as an anomaly not worth the precious time or funding of a serious expedition. For the next 5 decades, Caral remained a ghost. It was a place on a map, a footnote in an obscure report, but not a reality. The silent, empty city in the Supe Valley was left to the wind and the sand. What neither Kosok nor the academic establishment knew in that moment was that the city's most profound secret was not what it lacked, but what it contained within its very foundations. Hidden inside the pyramids were not treasures of gold or jade, but simple, woven reed bags filled with stones. These bags, known as shikras, were the key. They were organic, and organic material could be dated. But the technology that could unlock their secrets, radiocarbon dating, was still in its infancy. The ghost city would have to wait for someone who not only believed in its existence, but who had the modern tools to prove it. The wait would last a lifetime until a determined Peruvian archaeologist decided to face the ghost head on. As the decades passed, Paul Kosok's discovery faded into academic obscurity, a curious footnote dismissed by the gatekeepers of history. But the story of Caral was not over. It was merely waiting for its true champion. That champion was Ruth Shady Solis, a Peruvian archaeologist whose name would become synonymous with the lost city. Unlike the foreign explorers of the past, who often treated Peru as a treasure chest to be plundered, Shady was a daughter of the land, a dedicated scholar with a deep, unwavering belief in the forgotten history of her homeland. Her journey with Caral began long before the world would know its name. In 1975, as a young archaeologist surveying the Supe Valley for Peru's National Institute of Culture, she, along with the architect Carlos Williams, formally documented the mysterious mounds. She saw what Kosok had seen, a city of immense scale. More importantly, she understood the profound significance of what was missing. The utter lack of ceramics on the surface was not a sign of primitivism. To her, it was a flashing beacon signaling immense antiquity. This place, she realized, belonged to what archaeologists called the pre-ceramic period, a time before 2000 BCE that was thought to be dominated by small, nomadic groups, not city builders. But Shady's path was anything but easy. For years, she was a lone voice, possessing the knowledge and conviction, but lacking the resources and the institutional backing to launch a full-scale excavation. The archaeological world was still focused elsewhere, and the idea of a pre-ceramic metropolis was a radical concept that struggled to gain traction. More troubling was the dark chapter of Peruvian history that unfolded in the 1980s. The country was plunged into chaos by economic turmoil and the brutal insurgency of the Shining Path, a violent revolutionary group. Conducting archaeological fieldwork became not just difficult, but mortally dangerous. The Supe Valley was a remote and vulnerable area. For over a decade, Shady's dream of excavating Caral had to be put on hold as her country fought for its survival. Yet, she never forgot the silent city in the desert. She kept the flame of inquiry alive, writing, teaching, and waiting for the right moment. That moment finally came in 1994. With a new era of stability dawning in Peru, Shady established the Caral Supe Special Archaeology Project. With a small, dedicated team of Peruvian researchers, she returned to the desolate valley, determined to give the ghost city back its name and its history. The early years were a monumental struggle. The work was grueling, the conditions harsh. The team lived in simple tents, battling the punishing desert sun by day and the cold desert nights, all on a shoestring budget. They slowly, painstakingly, began clearing away centuries of sand and debris, revealing the true, magnificent contours of the pyramids and plazas. Shady knew that to convince a skeptical world, she needed more than just maps and architectural drawings. She needed hard, irrefutable proof of the city's age. The specific evidence she needed lay in the shikras. These were not just bags of rocks. They were an ingenious piece of ancient engineering. The flexible, interwoven reed bags filled with stones acted as shock absorbers, making the pyramid foundations resistant to earthquakes, a constant threat in the region. This ancient seismic-resistant technology was a wow factor in itself. But their true value to Shady was that they were organic. They were a perfect time capsule. To date them, however, she needed access to sophisticated and expensive radiocarbon dating technology, which was not readily available in Peru. This is where the story takes a pivotal turn, bridging the gap between national conviction and international science. Shady reached out for collaboration. She connected with Jonathan Haas and Winifred Creamer, two senior archaeologists from the esteemed Field Museum in Chicago. This American connection would prove to be the final piece of the puzzle. Haas and Creamer were initially skeptical, but they were deeply impressed by Shady's meticulous research and her fierce conviction. They recognized the potential for a discovery that could change everything. They agreed to help secure the funding and provide access to their state-of-the-art labs for radiocarbon analysis. Together, the Peruvian and American teams carefully planned their strategy. They extracted samples from deep within the foundations of the Pyramid Mare, the largest of the 6 pyramids, ensuring the materials were untouched since the day they were placed there. They collected fragments of the reed shikras and other organic materials like charcoal and wood, meticulously documenting the exact location of each piece. The samples were sealed, packaged, and sent from the dusty plains of Peru to a laboratory in the United States. Everything now hinged on a number. The skepticism of the European establishment, the legacy of Paul Kosok, and Ruth Shady's entire career were all riding on the results of a test that would measure the decay of carbon-14 atoms in a few scraps of ancient reed. The world was about to receive the biggest shock in the history of American archaeology. The story of how a few pieces of dried reed toppled a century of archaeological theory is a testament to the quiet, revolutionary power of science. While the samples from Caral made their journey to the American laboratory, a quiet but immense tension settled over the project. For Ruth Shady, it was the culmination of a life's work, the moment of truth for a belief she had held for over 2 decades. For Jonathan Haas and Winifred Creamer, it was a high-stakes gamble on a colleague's revolutionary idea, a gamble that could either lead to a historic breakthrough or a professional embarrassment. In the world of archaeology, dates are everything, and the established timeline for American civilization, carved into the granite of academic consensus, seemed unshakable. The oldest cities were supposed to be in Mesoamerica, home of the Olmec, dating to around 1500 BCE. Anything older was simply not in the cards. In the sterile, climate-controlled environment of the lab, technicians began their work, entirely unaware that they were processing evidence that would trigger an intellectual earthquake. They used a technique called accelerator mass spectrometry, a highly advanced form of radiocarbon dating that could analyze tiny samples with incredible precision. The science is elegant. All living things absorb carbon, including a tiny amount of the radioactive isotope carbon-14. When an organism, like the reeds used to make the shikras, is harvested, it stops absorbing carbon. The carbon-14 then begins to decay at a perfectly predictable rate. By measuring how much is left, scientists can calculate, with pinpoint accuracy, how long ago that organism was alive. The process was methodical, clinical, and devoid of emotion. But the numbers that came back were anything but. The first results were so radical, the lab technicians assumed there had been an error. They recalibrated their equipment. They checked for contamination. They ran the tests again. The results came back the same. The reed fibers from the shikras, taken from the foundation of the main pyramid, yielded a date of 2627 BCE. Let that sink in. Not 1600 BCE. 2627 BCE. The date was a bombshell. Further analysis of nearly a dozen other samples from across the site confirmed it. The core occupation of the city of Caral spanned from roughly 3000 BCE to 1800 BCE. This wasn't just a little older than previously thought. This was a cataclysmic shift, a jump backward in time of over 1,000 years. The city of Caral was contemporary with the construction of the Great Pyramids at Giza in Egypt. It was thriving centuries before the legendary city of Troy was built. It predated the rise of the Minoans on Crete and the building of Stonehenge in England. And, most critically, it predated the first recognizable civilization in Mesoamerica, the Olmec, by a millennium and a half. The discovery was no longer about a single city, it was about an entire civilization. Caral was the capital of what is now known as the Norte Chico civilization, a network of at least 20 interconnected urban centers spread across 3 river valleys. This wasn't an isolated experiment, it was a regional powerhouse. When the results were published in the prestigious journal Science in April 2001, the news exploded across the globe. The reaction from the archaeological community was a mixture of shock, awe, and for some, a painful, grudging acceptance. The very European and Western scholars who had dismissed the idea of an early American civilization were now confronted with irrefutable, carbon-dated evidence. The neat, orderly narrative they had carefully constructed for decades had been demolished overnight. Headlines captured the magnitude of the discovery. The New York Times proclaimed, "Oldest city in the Americas found, rewriting history." The Smithsonian Magazine asked, "First city in the New World?" The vindication was total. Paul Kosok, the amateur who had been ridiculed 50 years earlier, was proven to be a prophet. Ruth Shady, the tenacious Peruvian who refused to let the ghost city die, was hailed as a visionary. The collaboration between Peruvian dedication and American scientific resources had succeeded where decades of dogma had failed. But the carbon-14 dates were just the beginning. They had proven when Caral existed. Now, the world wanted to know how. How did a society without pottery, without the wheel, and seemingly without a conventional system of writing, build a city of such staggering complexity and influence? The secrets still buried in the sand were even more profound than its age. Uncovering this lost world would reveal a completely different model for human civilization. With its immense age finally established, the city of Caral began to give up its secrets, and what it revealed was a civilization unlike any other in the ancient world. This was not just an old city, it was a blueprint for a different way of life. As Ruth Shady's teams meticulously excavated layer by layer, they uncovered a masterfully planned urban center that covered over 150 acres. This was not a city that grew haphazardly over time. It was designed with a clear purpose and a deep understanding of social and religious order. The layout was divided into a clear hierarchy, an upper sector for the elite and a lower sector for the common folk. In the upper, more prestigious area stood the 6 main pyramids, towering over a complex of temples, ceremonial plazas, and spacious elite residences. A walk through this ancient space would have been an awe-inspiring experience. Imagine standing before the Pyramid Mayor, the Great Pyramid. It rose in 6 magnificent tiers, its earth and stone bulk soaring nearly 100 feet into the sky. A grand central staircase led to the summit, where priests and rulers would have conducted sacred rituals in special rooms, visible to the crowds gathered in the plazas below. These pyramids were not tombs for dead kings like in Egypt. They were vibrant, active stages for a living religion, public monuments designed to unify the populace through shared ceremony. The discovery of sea lion bones and other exotic marine delicacies in the garbage pits of the elite homes painted a clear picture of social stratification. The people who lived here held power, feasting on luxuries brought from the coast while the masses sustained the city. Down below, in the lower sector, were the simpler, single-story homes of the laborers, weavers, and farmers who formed the backbone of Caral society. But what was truly mind-boggling, what set Caral apart from nearly every other cradle of civilization, was what the city lacked. In a world where ancient history is largely the story of warfare and conquest, Caral had no fortifications, no walls, no battlements, no moats, no defensive structures of any kind. Furthermore, in all the years of excavation, archaeologists have never found a single weapon or any evidence of organized violence. No swords, no shields, no arrowheads, no depictions of warriors or conquered enemies. This has led to the astonishing conclusion that Caral was the heart of a peaceful society that flourished for over 1,200 years without the need for an army. Its power was not military, but economic and religious. The foundation of its wealth was, surprisingly, cotton. The people of Caral mastered irrigation on a massive scale, diverting water from the Supe River through an intricate network of canals to grow vast quantities of high-quality white and colored cotton. This wasn't primarily for clothing. It was for making immense, durable fishing nets. They then traded these nets with the fishing communities along the coast, just a dozen miles away, in exchange for a steady and massive supply of fish, particularly anchovies and sardines. This trade was the engine of their civilization, a sophisticated barter economy, inland technology for coastal resources. This concept, known as the maritime foundations of Andean civilization, was a controversial theory for years, but Caral provided the ultimate proof. The culture of Caral was also remarkably rich. In the city's main sunken circular amphitheater, archaeologists unearthed an incredible find: a set of 32 flutes, exquisitely carved from the hollow bones of pelicans and condors. Dated to around 2170 BCE, they suggest that music played a central role in the city's ceremonies. Perhaps the most tantalizing discovery of all was a quipu. A quipu is a recording device made of knotted strings, famously used by the much later Inca Empire. Finding a quipu at Caral suggests that this complex system of record-keeping is thousands of years older than previously believed. It was a form of three-dimensional writing, a physical database of knotted code used to track trade, astronomical events, or perhaps even sacred histories. This society was not primitive. It was highly organized, innovative, and deeply spiritual. The pyramids themselves were aligned with astronomical events, showing a sophisticated understanding of the cosmos. Caral presents a different model for what a first city can be. One built not on conquest, but on cooperation, trade, and shared belief. The city was eventually abandoned around 1800 BCE, likely due to severe climate change caused by a series of powerful El Niño events that would have brought catastrophic flooding and disrupted the delicate balance of their maritime trade, starving their economic engine. But its legacy had been sealed in the earth. Now, with the city unveiled, its discovery has sent shockwaves into the modern day, challenging not just the past, but the present. The unearthing of Caral was more than just the discovery of an old city. It was a fundamental reordering of the human story, a new chapter that had been buried for 5 millennia. The legacy of Ruth Shady's work, supported by her American collaborators, delivered a powerful and permanent blow against the Eurocentric biases that had dominated archaeology for so long. It served as a definitive, carbon-dated statement that the Americas were not a passive recipient of Old World ideas, but a dynamic, independent cradle of innovation. The existence of a complex urban society in Peru at the same time as Egypt and Mesopotamia proves that the capacity for greatness is a universal human trait, capable of blooming in diverse environments, from the fertile banks of the Nile to the arid river valleys of the Pacific coast. This paradigm shift is at the heart of what is known as decolonial archaeology. It is a movement to reclaim history, to empower local and indigenous scholars to tell their own stories, free from the colonial era frameworks that once defined their past for them. Caral has become a symbol of this movement, a source of immense national pride for Peru, and an inspiration for researchers across Latin America. It has helped to foster a new confidence in the depth and ingenuity of their own heritage, a heritage that was for too long marginalized or dismissed by the international academic community. It also raises tantalizing questions about cultural continuity. Did the engineering principles of Caral, like their seismic-resistant shikras, influence later Andean cultures? Did their quipu system evolve over 3,000 years to become the complex administrative tool used by the Inca Empire? Caral is not just a beginning. It is the deep root from which later, more famous Andean civilizations may have grown. For people watching this, you might be wondering, Did all this really happen overnight? Was the history of the Americas truly rewritten in an instant? The thing is, the intellectual shift was seismic, but the fight for Caral's legacy is far from over. Today, the sacred city faces urgent modern threats that are as destructive as any earthquake. In 2021, the world watched in horror as news broke that illegal land squatters had encroached on the ancient site. They bulldozed parts of the delicate 5,000-year-old archaeological zone, destroying priceless historical structures to plant avocado trees for commercial export. Ruth Shady, now in her late 70s, but as determined as ever, has faced numerous direct threats for her tireless efforts to protect the site. The battle to preserve this World Heritage Site is a stark reminder that understanding our past is a constant and ongoing struggle against ignorance and greed. Are we missing a key detail in this story? Perhaps the most important detail is that Caral's story isn't just about the past. It's about our present and our future. It forces us to ask profound questions. In a world history so often defined by war and conflict, what does it mean that one of humanity's first great urban experiments was founded on peace and trade? It challenges our cynical assumptions about human nature and the inevitability of violence. It shows us that there are other ways to organize a society, that cooperation can be a foundation for prosperity, and that we still have so much to learn from the ancient world. In the final analysis, the story of how European archaeologists called Caral a myth, only for Peruvian and American research to uncover the truth, is a powerful drama of discovery. It's a narrative of institutional resistance overcome by irrefutable evidence. Caral endures not just as a collection of sand-covered pyramids, but as proof that history is not a single, linear story written by one group of people. It is a complex, global tapestry, and we are still finding the threads. The city in the Supe Valley waited 5,000 years to tell its story. It waded through the rise and fall of countless empires, a silent testament to a world we almost missed. Thanks to a few defiant visionaries who dared to look where no one else would, we can finally hear its voice. Caral proves we've only scratched the surface of human history. If a civilization this grand could be forgotten, what else is still buried, waiting to be found? Let us know your thoughts below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that rewrite history.